Excellent.
Yeah, it's recording.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to season 4, episode 6 of the P.W.P Sessions podcast. I'm your host, Noel A. Figueroa. Thank you for joining me this evening. I'm so happy to have back as my guest Megha Sood. I'm excited to have a conversation with her about her latest happenings. For those of you that are not familiar with this podcast, the P.W.P Sessions podcast or the Poets with Purpose Sessions podcast is a podcast that I created where I interview new or established authors of poetry, rappers, or MCs featuring a performance of their work along with an audience Q&A session. I am your host, Noelle Figueroa. I am a poet, author, blogger, workshop facilitator, and event host. Tonight's returning guest is Megha Sood, and this is her bio. Megha Sood is an award-winning Asian American author, poet, editor, and literary activist, a literary partner with Life in Quarantine at Sanford University. Her 4 poetry collections include the award-winning My Body Lives Like a Threat with Flower Song Press 2022, My Body Is Not an Apology, Finishing Line Press 2021, and Language of the Wound is Love, Flower Song Press 2025. She has received support from Vona, Penn, Penn Women, Dodge Foundation, Kundiman, and Martha's Vineyard Writing Institute. Her 900 plus works have been featured in print, online journals, public exhibits, and anthologies, including the Poetry Society of New York, MS Magazine, New York Public Library, Penn Magazine by American Penn Women, PBS American Portrait, NPR, WNYC Studio, etc., and numerous universities, including Stanford University, Howard University, George Mason, CUNY, etc. A 2020 national level winner for poetry for the Poetry Matters Project, and a 4-time state level winner for the NAMI NJ Dara Axelrod Poetry Award, recipient of Certificate of Excellence from Mayor Stephen Fulop, Jersey City. Her poems and anthology, The Medusa Project, were sent to the moon in 2025 in collaboration with NASA. She co-edits the annual Brownstone Poets Anthology and lives with her son and husband in New Jersey. And you can find her at the Linktree link slash Megha Sood. Now, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we welcome back Megha Sood. Hey, Megha, good evening. How are you? Glad to
Good
have you back.
evening. Yeah, thank you so much, Noel, for having me back on Poets with Purpose. And it's always an honor to be part of this platform because you've been doing this for so many years. And as I always say, an artist cannot live in isolation, and we need people like you who actually spotlight our work, connect with other peoples in the community and help us in expanding our work and the mission.
Hmm.
So thank you so much for doing this and keeping Poets with Purpose alive. And I urge to all the people who are going to listen to this or are listening to right now to support this platform. And there are many ways you can donate to the Poets with Purpose, and it's all mentioned on the Facebook page. The various the venue streams you can actually donate it. So yeah, and thank you so much
Yes.
for bringing me back.
Oh, you're very welcome, and I appreciate the acknowledgement. Thank you so much. I'm excited to have you returning for this episode because there's been so much that's been so many great things happening with you since we last chatted on your last episode. Why don't I just get started with your latest book? Tell us all about that project and how it came about.
Okay, so as you mentioned in the bio, I'm like an author of the 4 poetry collection. My fourth poetry collection came out in March this year with the Flower Song Press, and it's a collection of almost like 58 poems, and it's divided into different sections. And we'll discuss more about how what's the underlying emotion and the mission behind the book. But in very brief, I can tell you the title is "Language of the Wound is Love." Okay, and actually the title came into existence when I was doing a poetry workshop 2 years back with during my fellowship with Martha's Vineyard Creative Writing Workshop with Adrian Matika, who is currently the poetry editor for the Poetry Magazine. And he was asking us to just like a simple line which like resonates with you, right? And being a literary activist, I've always I've always believe in the fact that poetry stimulates empathy, and empathy and compassion and love is needed to achieve social justice. and all the wounds which is inflicted on us, be it in form of social or gender-based discrimination or war and displacement or migration crisis, or any kind of like, violations against women, all sorts of human rights violation all across the world. And all these wounds, they need healing through love. So hence the title, The Language of the Wounds Needs Love. So that's how the book came about. And yeah, and finally it was accepted a year back, and finally it's available for purchase, and it's available all places where books are sold, and you can directly order from the Flower Song website.
Great. Congratulations on this project. Um,
Thank you.
what did it what did it take for you to put this project together? And what I mean by that is like um did you approach this book differently as opposed to your previous projects? Like was there a certain mood you were trying to capture or like or a different method? Like how would you describe the process of putting this project together?
Yeah, so initially the thought which came to my mind, as I told you, it's divided into five different sections, right? And initially the thing was, how as a first generation immigrant, I and people who have migrated to this country and all that, they always have this fear of losing their first language, right? Because it's very difficult for us to hold on to our language and culture. And as like a first generation migrant, we always have this hyphenated identity. And we are trying to balance the both, right? In order to keep ourself rooted in the original culture and heritage, and also trying to maintain a lifestyle which is here, right? So I'm seeing this in my family. As my son, he's growing up, he's more inclined towards, Western values and influences. And I do speak to him in Hindi at home, but he doesn't converse with me very, like, in like fluently, because there's not so much of conversations around him, like not his friends or not his teachers or all the, English, because English and Spanish is one of the more like predominantly language in this country. So the pain of losing the first language of any first generation migrant. So I started with that idea, how a first generation immigrant who comes to this country have so much they're losing to, in not in only terms of losing their culture and traditions, they have to really fight for it. And at the same time, they're also exposed to all the, xenophobia and everything, the racial based discrimination, everything which is happening in this country. At the same time, there is another level of struggle which is happening in our lives. So that was the first thought which kind of initiated, right? And then then I started collecting poems as a first generation immigrant. What are the various, how you have to face, and not only like the migrants which are come like, legally, the migrants who have been like, the product of war or refugee crisis or displacement and everything. So there are five different sections, and each of the sections talks about that. But the fifth section, which is called like brotherhood, right? That's the section which kind of ties all the book together, that everything which is inflicted on us, it needs acceptance, it's need healing through love. So brotherhood, the compassion and the solidarity is what we need in all these times where, you look around and people are suffering all over the world, right? Whether they are suffering for, war, whether they are suffering for any kind of other issue, or there's so many things which are happening. They have their own trials and tribulations, but in the end, all they need is empathy and compassion, because not everything is going to happen to you, right? Your home might not get destroyed in a war, you might not be a product of a refugee or something, but at least you should have that empathy and compassion. So that's the final section of the book, where it tells you about the importance of love, right, in today's time. So that's how the book is all structured, and that's how all the sections come together. And that's what I was seeing, that we all have all these issues, and they are different issues, but in the end, we have to think as a human being rather than being very self-absorbed or indifferent towards other people.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm really loving the concept and the content of this project. And, especially given, the unfortunate current political climate, which I really
Yeah.
won't dive into. But, I'm sure as we're all aware of what's going on, and you've touched on some of those things already. And with that being said, would you consider your project to be timely of its release, considering everything that's going on and its subject matter?
Yeah, it is, right? I'm like, there are so many poems which strongly relate to it, and even with my previous book, which was like My Body Lives Like a Threat, and that was the book which is like based on body identity and body politics in a toxic political environment, right? And there are poems in there which after even 2 years, like, holds true. I'm like, it's very unfortunate, but it's like that. And in the same way, there are poems in these books, if you read it's like, okay, you must have written it in the last week or last month, but I have written it in the past 1 year. But the things that, like, unfortunately, the things are getting, like, they're not getting better. They're getting bad. But on the other side, we have to hold on to love. We have to hold on to the hope, and we have to keep that activism in whatever way you have going on. So, I have my poetry and that I use it as an activism, right? I am a literary activist. And people have other, you don't, that's why, like, I have used this quote in my book, and it's by a Greek philosopher and a thinker. And it says, it's by Plato, and it says, be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a harder battle.
Right.
So that's what is everything, right? You might not know what's going inside. You meet so many people every day in your life, and you just casually ask them how you're doing, and everybody says, I'm fine. Do you think that's true? No, that's not true. So the thing is, but you have to be understanding. You have to be, you have to be socially aware of the fact that people are fighting their own battle. So yeah, there's so many poems, and I will read few of them. And when I was writing them, there were certain poems which are affected by the issues which happen at that time, and there's certain issues which are like, which kind of encompasses the human emotions, that you have to be, compassionate about things which are happening, because life is a mix of both things, right? You'll have moments to celebrate and you have moments to grieve. Not everything is going to happen to you, but if you don't have empathy and compassion for the fellow human being, what are you left as?
Exactly,
So,
exactly. And your subject matter is very, very important and crucial to, considering that everything is going on, especially when it comes to books being banned. Like when speaking about book bans, um, how important is it to you that you put emphasis on using your voice to speak to those issues that matter to you, given that everything that's going on?
yeah, like as an activist and as a writer and all, we know that's pen is mightier than the sword, and that's my weapon to fight. And it's always you have to like voice your opinion. Otherwise, if you are, as they say, if you don't speak for like things, you're being part of it. You become part of it. Being neutral is not the solution. So it's like it doesn't make you. Sometimes people are like, I don't care. As you have seen in the election also, some people chose not to vote, and that's the worst form of thing you can do, being a citizen or being a person with a right to vote, right? Because being silent also, it's kind of you being complicit in the situation.
Right.
So I feel that way. So I always like, advocate for that thing, that poetry is something which gives you which gives you a weapon, or which gives you a conduit, a medium for the unspoken and unheard. It gives not only you the space for catharsis, it not only gives you a safe space to hear out your own emotions, and something which you are very vulnerable, because it's a very courageous thing to be vulnerable, not because you're not writing for yourself, you're writing for the other people to look at. So writing poetry is a very courageous act for me. But at the same time, if you have the platform, if you have the necessary connections, if you can speak for those people who cannot speak for themselves, so that itself is a something like extremely valuable, what you are doing as a human being. So for me, it matters a lot. And for me, obviously, education and book and everything, because these are the medium which carries the wisdom of the history, and it keeps it alive for the future generation, for the current generation. And we, as poets and writers, are custodians of the current generations, right? And we are passing it to the future generations. So it's very, very important for us to safeguard these.
Absolutely. I'm in full agreement with that because, freedom of speech is a First Amendment right, whether we're speaking or whether we're writing, as citizens of this country, it is our right to voice our opinions, and nobody should be crucified for simply giving their opinion.
Yeah.
And, with that being said, throughout your career as a writer, given your subject matter and what you choose to be passionate about, Did you ever encounter any experience personally where you felt like you were being silenced? And if so, how did you address that?
So, yeah, like, if you see that there is a lot of categories which I belong to. I'm a person of color, I'm a woman, I'm a first generation immigrant, right? So I have been exposed to my share of, issues. Like I've heard like racial slurs on the, while passing and all that. I'm a person of color, I've been marginalized. There are like opportunities which I've not been offered because I'm a woman and I have to fight for it and all that, and that only made me stronger. And as I have always like mentioned this in so many of my interviews, like while growing up in India also, like, there were so many issues that I was like exposed to it, and you cannot fight back for every other issues which are happening. Sometimes you're just a passive, you're just like an audience, you are looking at it. But then when you get the chance to do something about it, then you should grab it, right? And you should actually speak and act. And that's what has happened. Like when I was in India and I was like studying, and then I like worked, and when I got married I shifted my base here. So when in India I was exposed to another level of issues, as in like sexual violence against women, or discrimination for people at workplace and all that, and pay inequity, and then gender discrimination and all that. And when I got married and I came here, then I was exposed to xenophobia. I was exposed to, discrimination based on my color and all that, right? And then I realized that it's the borders don't define the issues you have to deal with. It's the body that you live and it acts as a threat. And secondly, it's you have to fight and speak for yourself. Nobody will stand up for you if you don't, stand up for yourself. So that's the thing which was always deeply seated in me. Though I was not writing, like I was not now that I write, I was not writing, but I was doing activism in ways which I could. I used to speak up for people at my workplace. I used to speak up for people, in the public transport, if I see something wrong is happening and that person is not able to speak for themselves. And I think when I got the chance finally to start writing, it kind of, poured out of me. And that's why the first initial poems that I started writing like 7 years back, it was it was all about the issues the women has to deal with, whether it's feticide, female infanticide, or whether it's like rape or acid attacks or sexual violence or domestic violence and all. And I created an anthology, and it went from there. And my idea was like to how can I, through the power of my writing, can attribute to this activism, because there's always some limitations. I cannot go out for marches and protest. There are people who can, and I really appreciate and honor the fact that they can. But
Mhm.
this is something I have. But I want to like use it that how can I contribute to the fact that I can speak and I can empower people. I can learn and also generate the awareness up to other people that how can they do the same. And in that process, I found poetry as a medium. And why I chose that medium over nonfiction, fiction, and other genres is basically while growing up, I was exposed to there was always like music played in our house.
Mhm.
So music was there. We were a very musical family. We were very exposed to all sorts of classical and contemporary and, music and all that. And poetry is one of the medium in writing where there's there's rhythm and musicality in it. So
Wow.
I think that's why I was drawn towards it, this form of writing. Because people normally ask that why didn't you, become a nonfiction writer? Why don't you write essay? Why did you choose poetry? So this was one of the few reasons that I chose poetry.
That's awesome. And the thing about poetry that most people may not know is that there's a certain there's a certain liberation or freedom with poetry, because poetry, although yes, there's certain types of poetry like sonnets or other formats of poetry per se, but there's more freedom in poetry. Poetry doesn't have to rhyme. There's not necessarily an order or or a standard to poetry. It could be anything you, the writer, can make it to be, tailored to your own personality or to your own issues or to your own perspectives, and you could just put it out there in any form or fashion. There's really, like with other types of writing, like novels or short stories, there might be certain rules or structures you have to adhere to. But with poetry, there's more freedom with poetry. Poetry offers a certain level of creative freedom that doesn't exist with other formats. And with
Yeah.
that, I think I might not be necessarily 100% right in saying that there's a greater impact with poetry because I'm not trying to diminish other forms of writing, but I think when it comes to poetry, you're more likely to catch people's attention um when it comes to free verse or sonnets and so other types of poetry. I can't recall the exact names or styles of poetry offhand at the moment, but what I'm driving at is, with the creative energy that comes with poetry, that usually gravitates. It usually this type of writing usually catches people's attention, easier or more quickly than the other types of writing, especially when you're performing a poetry. When you're reading a poem or seeing a person having memorized their poem and they're acting out their poem. There's a certain energy and a cadence to it with poetry that you can't get with other forms of writing,
Yeah.
which grabs people's attention. To me, it grabs people's attention faster. So when you're speaking on issues like, social justice, economic injustice, racism, sexism, when you're addressing those issues in the poetic form, you're able to grab people's attention and get them to listen to what you're saying, to me, a little more faster than the other forms of writing. So it's not to say poetry is better than those other styles. I just feel that you have more creative freedom, when it comes to utilizing poetry.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, but like as in like poetry, how I started is because I was not actually, being educated in poetry. I did my master's in computer science. and and I was there in the technology field for quite some time and all that. But initially, when I didn't have knowledge about, there's like structured poems, there are unstructured poems and free verse. So in the structured poems, then you have to follow certain structures. Yeah, there's a rhyming, and there's like volta in a sonnet, and you have to follow the rules, the rhyming schedule and everything. You have to follow that, right? There's like sonnets, there villanelle and haiku, haibans, and all that. And then they are like free verse and spoken word. There's some poetry which is meant for the page, and there is some poetry which is like a spoken word poetry.
Right,
When the more stress is made on how it is being performed. How the intonations and the body language, the
right.
contact and the rise and the fall of the,
Mhm.
all that is like it creates an impression. It leaves an impression on you.
Mhm.
And poetry gives you such a like a freedom of a vast spectrum, that if you are that kind of person that you want to actually portray your emotion through a structured form, well, you have the whole 27 different forms of poetry. You can pick what you like. You can write in Petrarchan sonnet, Shakespearean sonnet, villanelle, name it, and all that. You can write in
Right,
those, and you'll be like, okay, I have challenged myself. I have learned new poetry forms. I have written a haiku, I have written a haiban and everything. And then you have like, no, I don't want, I want my thoughts to flow like stream of consciousness. Then you have free verse.
right,
Then there are some poetry which is meant for the page, like image poetry or eraser poetry, and then all that, which are meant to have the shape poetry, shape poems, and all that. And then there is spoken word. So I found that this level of the dynamics and this the whole spectrum which the poetry provides you, and you can delve in and you can find where you fit, how you fit, and what is the message. And that's what kind of like blew me off. And I'm like, and when I read the work by contemporary poets, and I'm like, these are people who have, they are the legends, and they are doing this, and they are sharing this. That's why I'm more like inspired by contemporary poets than the classic poets, because the contemporary poets like Kaveh Akbar and Ilya Kaminsky, Jericho Brown, and Era Limon and all that, they're living in the same time as I do. They're exposed to the same set of social issues which I do, and then they use the poetry, you know,
mhm,
to make the people aware of the issues around them, and how to do and what to do, right?
right.
And that kind of like that was the thing which kind of inspired me. So yeah, and the to piggyback on the same point, I would say yes, it's a common fact that if you read just the news, and you might forget it in a day or two, but if you read the same thing in a poem, it'll sit with you for some time, because it's not
Right.
only the written form, it's the emotion of the poem. It has the metaphor, the similes, and the different poetic devices, and it'll resonate with you, and it has a musicality. You always remember the beat of the song. not even the exact words, but then it'll stay with you. So I think that's the power of the poem, that's the power of the poetry, and that's the power of the words. So the poetry kinds of, combines both. It gives you the wordplay, so it uses the power of the words, and it uses the power, the oral power, as in like the power of music. It gives you that, the rhythm and the musicality, where you can use rhythm, you can write rhyming poems, or you cannot write rhyming poems. You can have spoken word and you can perform, and the people will be looking you as a performer, as a performance poet. So it has such a diverse range, and it gives you that freedom. And that's why I was also very driven towards it. So like completely agree with what you were saying about poetry.
Excellent, excellent. Now, what has the reception been to your latest project? Like what kinds of comments were you given with this latest project?
So, I think I'm like, obviously I'm gonna be like biased because it's my baby, my book, but it has been received like warmly by the community. And I am currently on a book tour, and it's I've did the launch and all with so many people and all that, and people are responding warmly to it because the poems in this book is like talking to them in various ways. Even they are not activists, they know that love and compassion is the thing which you need to have in your life. If somebody is going through, even through a mental issue or mental health problem, then you have to have the understanding and the awareness to understand what the person is going through, right? And same way, if you talk about, this is something very personal issue, and there's something which is issues related to your community, then comes the issues related to your society, then on a much higher level the issues related to country. So people can relate to this book on a various level. So I'm getting a very, like, good response in terms of the blurbs. The book has been got like it has received by the advanced readers and also the people who are buying. So I'm thinking like, I'm thinking it's doing pretty well. And till now I've been able to like do 20-25 events, and I've been booked for more events by the end of the year. And I'm happy that it's getting, the idea is to for the people to, read the message, the mission which is behind the book. And the more venues it gets exposed to, so I've been trying to reach out to universities and libraries and museums, and even to platforms, like even if it's virtual or in person. So I'm trying everywhere so that, the message is being received. Because until and unless you have written something, right, and your idea is to share it with the world, then you know how indie presses are. Once they are done, and they will try their own best, but they don't have the reach of a, the tier one kind of a press. And then you have to do everything around it when it comes to publicity and marketing. And then it comes to how much passion you have and how much strength and how much reach you have.
Right.
So, and special, and there, comes like people like you. And that's why I was like, I really want to appreciate the fact that people like you who are acting as community builders, and you give us these platforms. And this is the virtual platform. There are other organizations which have in-person platforms, and they have invited me, and I'm able to share my book with the people. And they come and read the poems, and they want to know more about my work. And that's where, like, okay, this is the whole idea of me writing poems about right now. If you get moved by something, if even one of the poems out of 58, like, say something about, and you get moved by it, and then my, work as a activist is like, done. So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really awesome. And you are a true inspiration to me. Everyone, all the poets I've encountered have inspired me in some way, shape, or form. And you also are among those poets that are very inspiring. You have accomplished so much, and and it is very inspiring to me to see how far you have come with all that you've written. And I'm not sure, and I'm quite sure, not just for me, but anybody who's already experienced you, or whoever's going to see this video will be inspired just the same. You know, Especially in times like these, we need more people with um stable voices, voices of truth, more voices of reason, more voices focusing on promoting empathy and compassion, and just genuine concern, for our fellow man, speaking to the issues that matter to all of us because we're all connected at the end of the day,
Yeah.
right? So with that being said, this can apply to anyone, but focusing on poets in general, poets pertaining to the arts, right? Um, what advice would you give to a poet? Let's say a poet approaches you and they feel like they want to become more involved in being an activist in their own right. Let's say there's issues that matter to them, and they want to incorporate activism in their poetry. Like, what advice would you give to them?
So yeah, so I've answered this question like in more ways than one, and I think it's part of me acting as an activist that I can actually share this information through my experiences. So the first thing is that you have to be aware of the message that what you're carrying, what is your mission behind it, what is specific, message you want to share it with the people. So I can give you an example that, for example, if you're talking about, if you want to spread the message about, the mental health, okay, or any of the social issues, if you're passionate about like the reproductive rights of the women and all that, so I would say that first you have to do your research in terms of your local community, that if you have organizations which do open mics. And I always ask people to connect with your local community first, in the same way that it's easier to meet people that way. You can go and meet in person, and they can connect you to other people, and they can help you in making your network. And then you have the option to if you think that sometimes you go on an open mic and you read your poem and you think, oh, that's it, I'm done with this, and then you meet with someone who's like, this poem resonated with me and I'm a part of a press, and I would really want your poem to be published in this and this anthology. And then once you get into anthology, you have a whole plethora of like 70, 80 people who are writing either on the same theme, or who are passionate about the same issues than you are, and then you get from one place to another, and that's how you build the community and the network. So I always say, but I also respect the fact that some people are like, okay, open mics is not my thing, but then, and I don't have the time to be, present for open mics and weekdays and their weekends and all that. So there is a very important thing. This is something called P.W.P, which is like poetsandwriters.org. And it's a website which not only gives you all the resources about the literary agents and different magazines and journals and anthologies where you can published, but there's a feature of it which is called groups, where you can look for people for different genres and kind of groups, and you can be part of those groups. And it is just like small group or a big group, and then you can be part of your own writing group. You can create your own writing group with the people who are passionate about the same issues as you are. And it's kind of an accountability thing, right? If you meet in a week, and it's a virtual thing. So then, if so, I'm giving you different scenarios and what works out with you. That is the first thing. First is you have to identify the issue that you're passionate about. Second is you have to identify the resources which are available in your area, whether it's local, whether it's county based, whether it's in your city, in your area. Look for the writing groups of your city or whatever. And then, if you want to escalate further, if you want to connect to people who are different cities, different states and all, then you have to be in a virtual setup, right? Because you can't be in all these places at once. Then there comes the virtual groups. And pandemic has been such a shifter in all these things, because people have realized that one of the benefits from the pandemic, it has given us the idea of connecting virtually, right? And you can and collaborating and working with anybody across the world, and you can still work and complete a particular project. So in the same way, you can reach your poetry through any part of the world, right? And you have to know, so these are the various resources which are at your disposal. You just have to look at the right place. And and after this, that's how my so I'm kind of actually mapping my own journey, because I never wanted to be an author per se. I always wanted to be a person who wants to write about social issues, and that's why I became an editor first, because I kept on publishing my own work. I kept on submitting to those anthologies who were socially conscious, so that I can contribute to their sales. Because once I write up, and then I used to buy their copies, and I used to buy, that's how I'm actually contributing to their revenue and all that. And then after getting published 500, 600 times and all that, somebody pointed out that, you should compile those work. And that's how I become an author later. But I became an editor first. I came out two of my anthologies. So every person has their own journey, but you have to be aware of what you want out of it. And you have to look for resources, and you have to be, committed and dedicated, because some people starts with a lot of dedication, but they lose that, the resilience that is needed. And that is true for anything you pursue in life. It's not about poetry. It's anything you pursue in your life, anything you want to do. You have to have that dedication and resilience in you, that there's a passion and you want, and there's a goal in there, and you have to work towards it. So if you want to write, and if you want to write with the people who are passionate just the way you are, you have to find your community. You have to make sure that you contribute. And at the same time, you also not, sometimes when I start my own blog, I started writing, but at the same time, I used to read so much from the blog posts or other people and appreciate what they have written. And that's how I started getting, advice from people who've been writing for decades. And they were giving me such valuable advice. And you know what? This is the poetic device you're using, you're not even aware of. This is what you should do. You should challenge yourself, learn more poetic forms and all that. And this is just free advice. But the reason being, because I also started reading their stuff and appreciate the fact. So you have to invest time, and you have to also appreciate the community you are being part of. So that's where the whole, emotion of being the artist cannot exist in an isolation comes in. You cannot always take away from the community. You have to give back to it in whatever way you can. So that's why you have to write. So you have to be part of the community, and you have to help the other writers also. And then that's how your network, that's how your connections will grow. And it'll not only help you, it'll help other people also. Like the way I worked for different projects and anthologies, right? And I started reading people from all across the world. I made a part of the anthologies, but at the same time, I'm gaining so many connections, right? And it kind of, it's just like expanding in all different directions. And that's why I worked with so many people all across the world, because I started with anthologies. And that's one of the tip I would say. So that's just a starting point.
Right. Well, that's definitely great advice for those that will watch this video for sure. And that provides the perfect segue to our next segment of this episode, because it's time, ladies and gentlemen, for Megha Sood to take the mic. And at this time, you have space to do up to 5 poems of your choice to give on the audience an idea of your empathy, your compassion, your powerful stance on activism, and in all subject matters of your choosing. So at this time, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much. So I'm going to start with the poem, which is something called, the pre-poem in a book, which is like the poem before the actual book starts. And because it's more or less, it's an ode to the poetry, because that's from where it comes from. So the poem is called a poem, and it's Hunger. Do you ever realize how the body reclaims itself, like the dried scar from its time of birth? You only realize its presence when you see it. Hunger reeks from your soul, and like water from a mother's hair wrung after a bath, it brings out scented memories of something pure and sublime. We all enter a poem, knowing its hunger, and emerge stripped naked of our emotions. There's always a death standing at the end of the sentence. Not every enjambment gives meaning. Some lines are meant to be left orphaned, like the day they found an old crumpled picture of my bomb city in my wallet. We all enter a poem, knowing its hunger, like a night, feverishly trying to find its salvation in the open mouth of the bloody dawn. And the next one I'm going to read is, yeah, it's it's called The Beautiful Death Around Us. And it's based on the invasive species, the lanternfly, which emerged in the summer of 2022 in the eastern part of the United States. And you know how when they were like lanternfly and it's an invasive species, and the message it carried is like, when you see it, kill it. So it was a very much like moral dilemma for me to, make it understand to my son that you have to kill this insect. And that's how this poem, like, came around. The beautiful death around us. I've been taught by my granny to always help an animal in need, even an insect, a monarch with broken wings, fluttering in the shining mud, shining bravely in the precipice of the city, stopping us in our tracks. I hold it gently in the center of my tender palms, like an infant, cuddling its existence with all my warmth, and tend to its broken wings till it can fly. One day, a small breasted warbler crashed against the blinding windows of my high rise and fell on the balcony. Death is a shining thing. It draws you in like a Pied Piper, a shining penny half covered in a roll of hay. I tend to its broken wings and wait feverishly for it to open its eyes. Numerous tales of kindness and humility come back to me, rushing, when sometimes kindness becomes a stranger to me. These days are strange. The year is strange. Death and dying have been given a new name. The normal has been anointed again. And yet again, there is an invasive species, as beautiful as a dream in the thicket of the night with its spotted wings and the fiery abdomen, a spotted lanternfly. And the message that it brings for us is, when you see it, kill it. What a terrible act of survival. It is either them or us. The existence is beautiful and yet so devastating. Sometimes I feel how much kindness is left inside this withering soul of mine that can kill a living being with all my might. And the third poem I would like to read is called The Trails of Kindness. And it's again, it tells you that how like kindness is a necessary gesture of acceptance, and we have to have kindness even in the, the worst of our times. We can't let that go. Trails of kindness. I count the years as I walk past the trees lining my courtyard, counting them one by one neatly on my supple fingers. The mighty oak has weathered worse and still nests sparrows. The jasmine tree, whose flower-laden shoots smile through their fragrant arms, waves me goodbyes. Their warm presence deeply carried by northern winds. Even with the slight opening in my kitchen window, they can make their presence felt. What more to this life than to count joys and blessings in the crawling lines of my mint plant that is growing and spilling joys in all directions? The new tender leaves of basil twinkling and shining through the sliver of sunlight. Warm, supple hands of my succulents holding water as kindness in their thick leaves remind me of the frail hands of my granny, combing my hair and making trails of kindness, reminding me always that kindness is a necessary gesture of acceptance, like the puny sapling breaking through the crumbling earth as it finds hope and growth through pain. And the next one, the second last one, is a poem which is very relevant to the times we are in, and it's called Rise. Let me take a And it's a poem which uses the anaphora poetic device where the word or the phrase it kinds of repeats itself for every verse. Rise. Rise above the opinionated heads on stooping shoulders of demised desires, on your sturdy legs or stilts, but rise and become the voice of the unspoken, war cry of the mute, hoarse whispers of the fallen in the crevice of night. Rise when their tongue is sliced and gutted out and vultures are feeding all their dent entrails. Don't be a mute spectator. They'll speak through you like an apparition, like a ghost in the machine, and will beg you to stay. Be a messiah, ready to be burned at the stake. Rise. Enrage their souls, buried deep in their shame, your tongue born out of fire, raising hair at the back of their neck, speaking in an unborn tongue like a catalyst for a revolution. You give them a mission, a purpose, a reason for their crestfallen souls, a tourniquet for their bleeding wounds, a moment to survive, a shiny glimpse of the future. Rise. Bedazzle them, rise like phoenix out of thin air, devour the stench of pointy accusations. Rise, rise up to see a new dawn, like the hope neatly tucked in the crevices of the unbroken seed. And I want to close my reading with the final poem in my book. It's called Brotherhood, and it starts with an epigraph by Martin Luther King Jr. We must live together as brothers or perish together as fools. We are all broken, crumbled, rounded again, made from the same clay, caked and baked in the same unforgiving oven. We all have cracks in us from where the light gets in. Frayed at the border, pulling apart at the seams, peeling off and breaking down into pieces of our miseries. We are all the same, living under the same ashen cloudless sky and blue moon in its reverie, breathing the same air, swooning over the same melody of the soul, crooning our necks to the same broken chords, in unison we roll. We all are the same, laughing and cracking up with welled up eyes and bruises we endure, getting stabbed by the same knife and bloodied by the same bullet. Caste, creed, or religion doesn't seem to differentiate or discriminate or beg to differ. We are all the same heartbeats, sliced and splintered into a million pieces, and the same God we worship, holding books with different verses. We all are the same from within, laughing at our scars with abject profundity. We are brothers and sisters, and together we shall live. Thank you so much.
Wow, wow, wow. Ladies and gentlemen, those were selections of poetry by Megha Sood. Megha, thank you so much. Powerful poetry with a message at that, a very, very significant messages at that. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Now, at this time, we're going to shift gears again. We're going to move into our Q&A session at this time. So with that being said, Patricia, thank you so much for joining in tonight. Do you have a question or comment for Megha?
Yeah, questions about, did you always know, did you always have a passion for writing as a child? Because I know I've had that.
So, thank you so much for the question, and thank you, Patricia, for always supporting me. I really appreciate it. So if you say that had I been writing as a child, I would say no. So I think it never dawned on me that I have to sit and write. I was more of a person of action, you know? So while growing up, if I see that something wrong is happening, I used to act on it. And I think it was very much later when uh, after working here and after shifting my base, and then after when I had to take a break from my job due to some personal reason, and then it gave me some time to, introspect and think about it. And initially, I started writing poems, but I was writing as a notes on the Facebook. And people, as in families and all, they're very biased about it and they were liking it. And then somebody from the WordPress community gave me the suggestion that you should start your own blog, because if you want to get constructive, positive, critical feedback, then you have to connect with the whole community of writers and poets, and then it'll help you grow. And that's what I did. But when I started writing, initially it was the stream of consciousness writing, and I used to write like 14 or 15 poems in one go. And then I realized that, there is something which I was always thinking about, but I was not able to write it down or put it like into words on paper. But when I got the chance, I used to start writing, and then I realized the power of poetry. And that's why my journey has been a very typical one that's been only 7 years and I've been writing. And I've completely pivoted from my role in the information technology field towards my passion of creative writing.
Mm. Mm. Another question. Have you ever think you're going to try some prose? Because originally, I'm talking about my experience, but I don't want to, it's your experience here, so I'm going to shut up. So, have you ever think of trying prose?
So I
Putting,
would say I have dabbled in a little bit of prose. I would say that in the year 2020, when we were in pandemic, and there was there was so much happening in our country in terms of like Black Lives Matter and all that thing and protest and everything. And I was writing poetry in response to that. And at the same time, they were like, I have written some essays and I have some opinionates and something, So I have written few essays. I do write like review of the books and all that, but I have like, written few of the essays. And I realized that it was so much at that time that sometimes I feel that, I have to write more than this, and I've written so much, and I have to educate myself and read more about it and how the slavery and everything is happening in there, and how, the police brutality and the violence, it has been really systemic in this country and it has been happening for so many years. So I have to first educate myself and read about it. And in that same process of reading so much of nonfiction, so much of reading the essays and all, it kind of, I also wanted to write. So yeah, prose. And if you talk about poetic prose, I there is a I have actually in that process I got so much involved in writing poetic prose that I have a whole manuscript of poetic prose. I wrote so much, and and some of them got published also. But yeah, I'm equally charmed by that form of writing. So if you say in the same way that how you write a hibernus, you write poetic prose and then you end up with a haiku. So I have done those, and in the same way I realized that you sometimes you don't want the line breaks, you just want to write it in one block. And that's how I started writing the poetic prose. And if you say that if I've dabbled in that, but I've like limited the prose to the poetic form. I haven't gone to, writing novellas and novels, or, fiction or nonfiction. But I have written short stories. And that's the thing. I was like so surprised. I've the first short story, which, not the story, the essay, one of the few essays which I wrote during the pandemic got accepted by Stanford. So that was my entry point into the Stanford, that they were looking out for people to share their experience during pandemic. So I wrote a whole, the piece essay based on my my experience as a mother, my experience as a woman, and how this thing has happened after 100 years, and this is nobody has no idea. And they had a call out, and that's how they came to know about this. And then they reach out to me for the project that I was the literary partner for, right? And that's how they invited me. So if you say that I dabbled in some other form of writing, and it opened a whole new opportunity for me. So yeah, and it's always challenging, whether it's poetry or prose. If you write in your new form, it gives you new perspective. So I would always encourage people to try new forms of writing, because it gives you a new way of reaching your, saying out the same thing you're saying it with one form of writing, and you can say the same thing in a different way. It challenges you and helps to, make learn and grow as a writer. So I will always encourage the fact that you should dabble in different forms of writing.
I personally think that by writing poetry, I know from my experience, probably I don't know if probably worked with you, but I noticed that when I started writing poetry, I became better in doing prose and short stories, and even got my first novel out because of poetry. Made me think about things. You don't have to say like these long lines. You can just say it just like that.
Yeah.
And I really thank poetry for doing that for me. And I sounds like it's doing it for you too as well.
Yeah, it definitely has. Yeah. The first thing it has done is like before that I could be use of somebody else, it has helped me in processing my whole emotions. And and that's where the poetry comes in. It gives you that safe space, and it just empowers you. And you cannot help anybody else unless and until you have helped yourself. Self form is the best form of love. You cannot love anybody else if you're not loving yourself, and that's the true thing for poetry has helped me first, and that's why it empowered me to help others. So yeah, that is absolutely true.
Thank you. This is a great reading. I really enjoyed this interview.
Thank you so much, Patricia.
And
Excellent.
thank you, Noel.
Excellent. Thank you, Patricia. Appreciate your presence. Thank you so much. One other question before we close out, Megha. Getting back to the topic of book bans, have you done anything personally to address all these attempts at banning books, whether it's signing a petition or some other kind of action?
Yeah. So actually, I'm a member of the PEN America, and it's an organization which is like fighting against the book bans, and they have their petition going on, and you can write to your senators, you can write to your representatives in Congress asking them not to ban the books. You can, so there are various ways you can reach out to your local councilmen and local people in your country, and then you can represent, your representative in Congress, and you can sign those petitions. So I have done that, and the other literary organizations, if they do send out petitions and all that, I support and share it with my network, so that the more opposition they have, the more voices they have, the more support they have, the more the better. In this, the number counts. So that's the thing, you have to speak up. And if you get, I would urge that if you get across any of some petitions and all that, not only you should sign it, you should share it with your network. So it kind of, even if you can spread it to 5 people, and those 5 people can, pass it on to more 5 people, there's a growth of this, and there's strength in numbers, and you can help pass the mission and all that. So PEN America is one of the organizations which is doing a very, a proper mission of like fighting against the banned books. You can be part of, you can be a member at large, or you can be there are different chapters all across the country, depending on where you are located. You can join them and be part of that mission.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Now, do you have any events that you'd like to mention before we close out?
So as I mentioned before, I'm currently on the book tour, and in addition to the book tour, because I work with different organizations in different capacities, as a spoken word judge, or as an editor, or as a like a with Art Pride NJ, I worked as a independent advocacy member. So you can go to my website or the link tree, and there is a link for all the book tours there. And it has all the mentions. Some book tours are like, some events are in person, some are virtual. And in addition to this, as the event approaches, then I share detailed information about how to join the event if it's in person, or how to, join it virtually. So if you follow me on any of the social medias, and like Facebook, Instagram, and or LinkedIn, or on Linktree, then you will get that information, and you can come and help support me and support other writers, because sometimes most of the time it's like in collaborative event, right? There are other writers out there, and it's a networking session. You get to meet, and they're like Trisha, we want to give shout out to the Brownstone reading, right? Brownstone reading is an excellent resource. It's a virtual thing, but the amount of like people are there who are networking with each other, who are sharing their own events, who are sharing their anthology callouts, their journal callouts, or events callouts, and that kinds of help build a network, right?
Wow.
We have never met in person in the sense, in terms of Brownstone poetry reading, but it's such a powerful platform. And that's what I say, that you go out in whatever capacity, you build a network, you be a part of the network. You don't only give to the network, you also get from the network. So it's a win-win situation. So you want to be part of the community, so make sure that you're also giving back to the community. So yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much. So as we close out this episode, I just want to say first and foremost, thank you. Thank you, Megha Sood, for coming back. A pleasure to have you again in conversation. I'm excited for your latest project, and as well as what you've already accomplished. I wish you all the best with your book tour and any other events you plan to get involved with. All the best to you, and continue to be an inspiration and speaking out on what matters to you. Thank you, Patricia, for being my guest, and thank you to the audience that will be viewing this this episode in the future. Coming up next tonight at 9:30, I will be in conversation with fellow poet Craig Bradley. His first time on the P.W.P Sessions podcast. You can catch it at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And for more information about the PWP Sessions podcast, as well as Poets with Purpose, you can reach me at 646-372-6230 or email at poetswithpurpose@gmail.com. Poets with Purpose is now online. There is a full-blown website now for Poets with Purpose. If you haven't already, go to WordPress, poetswithpurpose.wordpress.com. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to keep up with all the latest happenings. All of my logos and flyers are designed by the excellent team at Eclipse Graphics. You can find them on Instagram at @EclipseGraphicsNY, or you can go to their website, eclipsegraphicsny.com. And lastly, for those of you that will be interested in making a donation, you can do so through PayPal, Tap Media Man, Cash App, $Anointed Pen, or through Zelle, utilizing my phone number. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes Season 4, Episode 6. This episode will be uploaded to the Poets with Purpose YouTube channel within the next half hour to an hour or so. So be on the lookout for that upload in order for you to share on your social media platforms. Megha, thank you so much. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you all to my audience for your support. It's very much appreciated. You all have a good evening and God bless. Thank you.
Thank you so much.